It was my first night shift at the grocery store, a job I took to save up for college. I was excited, ready to earn some money, but I quickly learned that the night shift had a different atmosphere. The store was empty, quiet, and every little sound echoed through the aisles, sending chills down my spine. As I clocked in at 10 p.m., the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, illuminating the aisles filled with goods. My manager, Frank, a gruff man in his late 50s, gave me a quick rundown of my duties. Stock shelves, keep the place clean, and whatever you do, don't go into the back room unless I'm with you, he said, his voice low and serious. I nodded, thinking it was just his way of being overly cautious. The first couple of hours went smoothly. I stocked the cereal aisle, filled the dairy section, and even had time to grab a snack. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, I felt the weight of the silence settle around me. The only sounds were the hum of the coolers and the occasional creak of the building settling. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just the nervous energy of working alone. Around midnight, I heard a strange noise coming from the back room, a soft thud followed by a low, almost mournful sound. I paused, feeling a chill run down my spine. It's just the pipes, I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the unease. But something compelled me to investigate. I walked to the back room, my heart pounding. I knocked on the door, but there was no response. Gathering my courage, I slowly opened it, peering into the dimly lit space filled with boxes and equipment. The air felt colder and a shiver raced down my spine. Suddenly, the thudding noise resumed, louder this time, almost rhythmic. I glanced around, but the room was empty. My imagination ran wild, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I turned to leave, but as I did, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow flitting across the wall. I froze, heart racing. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling. No response. I stepped back into the store, closing the door behind me, feeling like I had narrowly escaped something. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. It was just my mind playing tricks on me, I thought. As the hours dragged on, I kept glancing at the clock. It felt like time was crawling. Around 2 a.m., I decided to take a break. I made my way to the small break room, pouring myself a cup of coffee. As I sipped the bitter brew, I heard the sound again, a soft thud coming from the front of the store. My stomach dropped. I walked out cautiously, peering into the aisles. Everything seemed still, but then I noticed something odd. One of the shopping carts was slowly rolling away from the display. I blinked in disbelief. "That's impossible," I whispered to myself. I walked over and stopped the cart, my heart racing. Just as I was about to head back to my station, I saw something move at the far end of the store. A figure dressed in a dark hoodie was standing by the produce section. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "Hey, can I help you?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, unmoving. My instincts kicked in, and I slowly made my way toward it, each step feeling heavier than the last. As I got closer, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. The figure was too still, too quiet. I reached the produce section, and as I turned the corner, I found it empty. No one was there. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "Okay, this is getting weird," I muttered, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Trying to shake off the growing anxiety, I returned to my tasks, but I couldn't concentrate. The noises continued, thuds, whispers, and the unsettling feeling of being watched. I decided to call Frank, but when I reached for my phone, I realized the battery was dead. Great, I thought. Just great. The clock ticked closer to 3 a.m., and I was convinced I was losing my mind. I decided to venture back to the break room, thinking maybe I could distract myself with some music, but as I walked past the back room again, the door creaked open slightly. I hesitated, debating whether to go inside again. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pushed the door open. The room was just as I had left it, but now I could see something on the floor, a small, crumpled piece of paper. I picked it up, unfolding it carefully. It was a note, written in shaky handwriting. "Get out. They're coming for you." A chill ran down my spine. I glanced around the room, feeling the weight of an unseen presence. Suddenly the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness for a split second. I stumbled back, panic rising within me. I had to leave. I dashed out of the back room, heart racing, and headed for the front of the store. Just as I reached the registers, I heard a loud crash from behind me. I spun around, fear gripping me. The back room door slammed shut, and I could have sworn I saw a shadow dart past the windows. "Frank!" I shouted, desperation in my voice. But there was no answer, only the oppressive silence of the store. I rushed to the front doors, but they wouldn't budge. I pulled and pushed, but it felt like they were locked from the outside. In a panic, I glanced back at the aisles. The figure from before appeared again, this time standing right in front of the dairy section. I could make out the outline, but their features were obscured. I felt frozen in place, dread washing over me like a tidal wave. "Leave me alone!" I screamed, my voice cracking. The figure didn't move. Instead, it raised an arm, pointing directly at me. I stumbled backward, and that's when I heard it. A low, guttural growl emanating from the shadows behind the aisles. My mind raced. I had to find a way out. I sprinted back toward the employee entrance, praying it wasn't locked. My heart pounded in my chest as I yanked the door open and burst outside into the cool night air. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, fumbling for my keys in a panic. I could feel the shadows creeping behind me, the fear propelling me forward. I jumped into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut. My hand shook as I turned the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. I sped out of the parking lot, glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure following me, but the grocery store loomed behind me, silent and foreboding. I drove home in a daze, my heart still racing, trying to process what had just happened. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself it was just a bad dream, a trick of the mind from working too many hours. But deep down, I knew what I had seen. The note haunted me, a warning I couldn't shake. I didn't return to that store again, and I've never worked a night shift since. Weeks later, I learned that there had been a series of unexplained incidents at the store. Employees quitting in the middle of shifts, strange noises reported by customers, and even sightings of a shadowy figure in the aisles. Some said it was the spirit of a former employee who had passed away under mysterious circumstances, while others believed it was something darker. It was an ordinary autumn day when everything changed. I was in my junior year of high school, excited for the crisp weather and the upcoming Halloween festivities. But one thing loomed over my excitement: my chemistry teacher, Ms. Larson. She was a strict, no-nonsense educator, known for her sharp tongue and rigorous grading. I thought I had seen the worst of her, but I was terribly mistaken. At first, I chalked it up to my anxiety about grades. I was struggling in chemistry, and Ms. Larson had a way of making her disappointment painfully clear. She would glare at me, her eyes like ice, whenever I fumbled an answer or submitted a less-than-perfect assignment. But that was nothing compared to what would come later. One fateful Friday, after a particularly grueling week, I stayed after school to get extra help. I thought maybe if I showed my dedication, Ms. Larson would go a bit easier on me. As I walked into the empty classroom, I noticed an eerie stillness. The usual sounds of the school had faded away, leaving only the ticking of the clock on the wall. Ms. Larson arrived a few minutes later, her heels clicking ominously on the linoleum floor. She was in a bad mood that day. As she began to explain the material, I could sense her impatience growing. I struggled to keep up, feeling more and more flustered. Finally, she slammed her hand on the desk, startling me. "Why can't you grasp this? It's simple," she yelled, her voice echoing in the empty room. I stammered an apology, my face burning with embarrassment. But instead of letting it go, she leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. "I think you need a little motivation." I had no idea what she meant until she pulled out a stack of worksheets from her desk, all marked with harsh red ink. "You will stay here until you understand this material. I'll be watching you," she said coldly. At first, I thought she was just being tough, trying to push me to do better. But as the minutes turned into hours, I began to feel a growing dread. She stood over me, her presence oppressive, offering no help, only scorn. Every time I made a mistake, she would lean in, her breath chilling against my ear, whispering insults that made my stomach turn. Hours passed. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the fluorescent lights flickered above us. My panic grew. I had missed my bus home, and now it was just me and her in that dimly lit classroom. I felt trapped, the walls closing in as she continued her relentless tirade. "Do you want to be a failure?" She sneered, her tone dripping with malice. "Because that's what you're going to be if you don't start trying harder." I tried to focus, but my mind was a whirlpool of fear and anxiety. As I attempted to solve another problem, she suddenly grabbed my wrist, her grip like a vice. "Let me show you what failure looks like," she hissed. I froze, terror coursing through me. I was too stunned to respond. She pulled me up from my desk and dragged me to the back of the classroom where a large dark cabinet stood. With a swift motion, she swung it open, revealing a frightening array of tools, rulers, scissors, and even a few objects I couldn't recognize. My heart raced as I realized she was serious. "Maybe a little pain will help you remember," she said with a twisted smile. Panic surged through me. I was just a girl, scared and alone, and here was my teacher, the one person I was supposed to trust, turning into a monster before my eyes. I wanted to scream, to run, but I felt frozen, paralyzed by fear. Suddenly, I found my voice. "Please, just let me go home," I begged, tears welling in my eyes. But she only laughed, a chilling sound that echoed in the empty room. "You're not going anywhere until you learn." In that moment, I knew I had to fight back. I summoned every ounce of courage I had left. "You can't do this," I shouted, surprising even myself with the defiance in my voice. Her expression shifted, anger flaring in her eyes. But instead of retaliating, she hesitated, as if weighing her next move. I seized the opportunity and bolted toward the door. My heart pounded in my chest as I yanked the handle, but it was locked. I scrambled to find another way out, panic surging through me. "Stop!" she yelled, her voice cold and commanding. I turned to face her, desperation flooding my thoughts. "Why are you doing this? I just want to learn." Her gaze softened for a brief moment, almost as if she were struggling with her own demons. But then the mask slipped back into place. "You think you can just waltz in here and expect everything to be easy? Life doesn't work that way." I felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. "You're supposed to help me, not hurt me." Something flickered in her eyes. Was it guilt? Regret? But then it was gone, replaced by coldness. "You don't understand what I've sacrificed for this job. You think you're the only one struggling?" Her words hung in the air like a noxious fog, thickening the tension in the room. I had no idea what she was talking about, but I could see that she was spiraling. I needed to get out. I rushed past her, pushing against the door, but it wouldn't budge. In a moment of desperation, I turned and faced her, a mix of anger and fear boiling within me. "You're not my teacher anymore. You're just a bully." Her expression darkened, and I braced myself, expecting her to lash out. But instead, something changed. The rage in her eyes faltered, and for a brief moment, I saw a glimpse of vulnerability. A woman trapped in her own torment. "Maybe you're right," she whispered, her voice shaky. "Maybe I'm just trying to make you into something I couldn't be." I hesitated, the tension in the room shifting. "You don't have to hurt me to help me." But instead of responding, she turned away, her back to me. I seized the opportunity and pushed against the door with all my might. To my surprise, it swung open and I stumbled into the hallway, gasping for breath. I didn't stop running until I was outside, the cool air hitting my face like a splash of water. I made it home, shaken and terrified, but relieved to be free. The next day, I reported her. I didn't know what would happen to her, but I knew I couldn't let her continue her reign of terror. As the investigation unfolded, I learned that Ms. Larson had been under immense pressure, battling her own demons. But that didn't excuse what she did. The school took action, and she was suspended, eventually losing her position. Even now, years later, I still think about that day. I often wonder if I could have reached her in a different way. But one thing remains clear. Sometimes the monsters we face aren't under our beds or in dark alleys. They can be the people we're supposed to trust, hiding in plain sight. I didn't want to move into the house. It was old, falling apart in some places, and had that musty smell like no one had really lived there for a while. But the price was too good to pass up. My wife, Lauren, fell in love with it right away, even though I had a strange feeling about the place from the moment we stepped inside. It wasn't haunted, not in the traditional sense, but something just felt off. It was the attic. Something about that attic made my skin crawl, but I didn't say anything. The realtor had mentioned the house's previous owner passed away, and that her family was selling it as is. I didn't think much of it at the time. A few weeks after we moved in, Lauren decided to do some redecorating. She had always wanted an old house to make her own, and this place was her blank canvas. One Saturday, she suggested we finally check out the attic, maybe clean it up and turn it into a storage space. I didn't want to, but I couldn't give her a reason why. So I agreed. The attic stairs creaked and groaned as I pulled them down, and the faint smell of dust and old wood hit me as we climbed up. It was dimly lit by a single bare bulb that flickered weakly. The space was packed with boxes, old furniture, and covered in thick layers of dust. Most of it looked like junk, just things the previous owner had left behind, but there was one thing that stood out immediately. In the far corner, sitting in a rocking chair, was a doll. I'm not talking about some cute little porcelain doll or a kid's toy. This thing was life-sized, almost like a mannequin, with glass eyes that seemed to follow you around the room. Its skin was made of faded cloth, and it was dressed in this old-fashioned frilly dress that was once white, but now yellowed with age. The hair was dark and matted, and it looked like it hadn't been touched in years. But the weirdest part? It was sitting perfectly upright, arms resting on its lap, as if it was just waiting for someone. "That thing is creepy," I muttered under my breath, but Lauren seemed fascinated by it. "Oh, come on, it's probably some antique. A little cleaning, and it might be worth something," she said, walking closer. I stayed back. There was something about that doll that made me uneasy. Lauren, of course, thought I was being ridiculous, so she picked it up and carried it downstairs. She wanted to put it in the guest room as some kind of quirky decoration. I tried to argue against it, but it wasn't worth the fight. That's when things started to get weird. The first night the doll was in the house, I woke up to this strange sound, like the floor creaking outside our bedroom door. It was slow and rhythmic, like someone walking back and forth in the hallway. I sat up in bed, straining to listen, but after a few minutes the sound stopped. I figured it was just the old house settling and tried to go back to sleep. The next morning, though, Lauren mentioned something odd. "Did you get up last night?" she asked over breakfast. "No, why?" She hesitated. I could have sworn I heard someone walking around. I didn't want to say it, but I had heard the same thing. Over the next few days, the noises got worse. Footsteps in the hallway, the sound of doors creaking open on their own, and this strange feeling like I was being watched, especially when I was near the guest room where the doll was. I tried to ignore it, but it was starting to mess with my head. One night, I woke up again to the sound of footsteps. This time they were closer, right outside our bedroom door. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly got out of bed and opened the door. There, standing in the hallway, was the doll. I froze. It was just standing there, perfectly still, staring at me with those glassy, lifeless eyes. I blinked, and for a second I thought I was dreaming. But when I reached out and touched it, the fabric of its dress was real. The cold texture of its cloth skin unmistakable. I grabbed the doll and threw it back into the guest room, slamming the door shut. I didn't say anything to Lauren the next morning. I wasn't sure how to explain what had happened without sounding insane. But the following night it happened again. The footsteps, the creaking, and then the doll was back. This time it was sitting in the chair in our bedroom. I know for a fact I didn't move it, and neither did Lauren. I was losing my mind. I grabbed the doll, took it outside, and locked it in the shed. I wasn't going to let that thing back in the house, but even after it was gone, the footsteps didn't stop. It was as if whatever had been attached to the doll was still there, lingering in the house, watching us. The final straw came when Lauren saw it too. It was a few nights later. We were watching TV when we both heard it, the unmistakable sound of the rocking chair upstairs, creaking back and forth. We looked at each other and without saying a word went up to the attic. There, in the exact spot where we had found it, was the doll, sitting in the rocking chair. Lauren screamed and I just stood there, frozen. There was no way it could have gotten out of the shed, no way it could have moved itself. But there it was, sitting perfectly upright, eyes gleaming in the dim light, almost as if it was smiling. We left the house that night. I don't know what it was. Maybe some spirit attached to the doll. Maybe something darker. We never went back, and we sold the house a few months later. The new owners? I don't know what happened to them. But sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I can still hear that damn rocking chair creaking back and forth. To this day, I wonder about that night. Was it a figment of my imagination, or was there truly something sinister lurking in that grocery store? Whatever it was, I'm grateful I made it out that night, and I never plan to find out what lies in the shadows of a grocery store after dark.